Hello everyone and welcome to my video on the new PMP exam for the year 2021. My name is Edward Shehab and you probably have been watching all of my PMP videos and maybe you have not taken the exam and you've heard that there will be a lot of changes for the year 2021 and you might be concerned. Well, if you are, then you have a valid reason to be concerned if you have been studying all along because there are significant changes that would happen next year. I'll talk about all these changes. I'll talk about similarities, hopefully make it easy for you. If you have not, taken the time to look at the differences, to look at the exam blueprint, to try to understand what the differences are, hopefully this video will do that for you. All right, so one thing I need to start with is if you've been studying for the exam and you've been wanting to do this and get PMP certified, then I urge you to get certified as soon as possible before the year ends. January 2nd, 2021 is when the new exam starts, and I think the end of this year is when you can still take the exam based on the current type of questions or current type of exam. So differences between this exam and the coming exam are the following. I'll tell you similarities first. It's still going to be PMBOK 6, all right? PMBOK 7 is not going to be issued till about second quarter of next year. So it's still going to be PMBOK 6 for this exam and for the one in 2021. So what you've been studying in the PMBOK is not a loss, all right? So it's the same, right? However, when you've been reading for this exam right now, the current exam, you probably have not focused a lot on Agile. If you have been reading the Agile portions, and especially that piece at the very end of the downloadable PMBOK, if you're a PMI member, then you're going to be just fine because that piece at the end covers for the Agile, all right? But if you've been covering the 10 knowledge areas plus the introduction, you went all the way to, let's say, stakeholders, and you finished the PMBOK, but you didn't read the Agile portion, you were fine for this exam right now. What I mean is this, right? So this is the PMBOK, right? This is the PMBOK guide. If you bought it, you probably found that it was two books, right? There's the PMBOK guide and there's the Agile Practical Guide, which is a small booklet that was added into it. For this current exam, this one, the Agile Practical Guide, Practice Guide, has not been relevant. It's not really needed for the sake of the exam. It's good to know, but it's not needed for the exam. Even in the PMBOK guide, the portions that talk about Agile trends, Agile or adaptive considerations, these were good to know, but they weren't really a significant part of your questions. All of your questions were mainly waterfall type predictive approach, predictive planning. The new exam is going to be 50% predictive and 50% adaptive. In other words, 50% waterfall and 50% Agile. All right, so that means half of the questions are going to be based on Agile approaches. So if you are not someone who is exposed to the Agile environment, this is going to be tough for you, and you should get certified this year and not wait. There's no advantage for you to wait, right? Other than you're going to have to learn things that you're not familiar with. So I urge you, if you're a civil, mechanical, or other type of engineering that have not really dealt with Agile and you don't really need to deal with Agile, I urge you to take the exam this year based on the content that is in this PMBOK guide. You don't really need to worry about the Agile companion here, all right? This one is only needed for next year's exam, all right? So similarities, same PMBOK guide, except that for next year, you need the second piece, the small booklet that was added into the PMBOK. If you're downloading the PMBOK guide as a PMI member, it is included in it. So right now, I'm looking at the downloadable version. You can see it's 978 pages. That includes this Agile one, which starts at page 700 something towards the very end, right? I never needed to do that when I did my training up to now, but I will need to cover that next year for the people who are going to take the new exam. So that's one thing to know. The other thing you need to know is that the exam right now is based on the 5 process groups: initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, control, and closing. Not, in the new format of the exam, which is the new blueprint, which I have here in front of me, it's going to be based on 3 domains, and specifically these: people, process, and business environment. It's no longer initiation, planning, execution, monitor, control, and closing. That doesn't mean that they went away. They're still there. The same knowledge you had from the PMBOK is still relevant, right? And it will be included in this 50% part. Probably also covers some of the areas involved here in people. So what it means here is that PMI has restructured the way they score you in the exam. They've done an evaluation of the role of the PM, and they found that it isn't the way it always was. It is more about you knowing the process, but you having people skills and an understanding of the business environment. You can no longer just be a technical PM covering the 10 knowledge areas and do fine. Mind you, it wasn't always technical anyways with the 10 knowledge areas. So you have to think about it. There was the resource part with a lot of things about motivating the team, about, team building and, the Tuckman ladder in team building, forming, storming, norming, performing. There was also the conflict management. There was a lot of things. There are a lot of things that have been added in there, especially with stakeholders and how to engage stakeholders that are part of what is now the people portion. So although they don't have the 5 process groups, they have the 3 domains now, it still doesn't change the fact that it's still the same content in the PMBOK. So a lot of people would overwhelm you, and you see a lot of these trainers or trainers websites that tell you, do the exam now, the world's going to end, it's going to end forever. The old PMP will be gone in about that many days. Yeah, it will be gone, but gone but not forgotten. It'll be gone, but it doesn't mean that what I studied is gone. I can still study it the same way, and they tell you it's going to be harder. That's baloney. It's not going to be harder. If you're very technically inclined and you've never seen the management side of things, maybe it is harder for you because now you have to answer questions pertaining to emotional intelligence, team building, team performance assessment, stuff you probably never really bothered with before, and maybe were not that relevant on the exam before. All right. So let's talk about the second point. It used to be 5 process groups, but now it's 3 performance domains. Same content is just restructured a little bit differently. All right. So your content from what you've studied so far in the PMBOK, still very valid over here. But the content we covered here in the PMBOK guide now represents a portion of this process part. It actually covers the 50%. However, because half of the questions are going to be based on the Agile approach, you are probably going to feel the difference in the nature of the question. So that means PMI has a new pool of questions that heavily touches on the Agile side, right? So we've looked at this PMBOK guide and we've been able to answer questions, but probably from the predictive or waterfall side. Now that process, which represents 50%, which is this PMBOK guide, has to be looked at from the adaptive side, right? Also, half of it. Now, if you're wondering where do you get that adaptive or agile portion of it, it is in the PMBOK. We just never really paid too much attention to it. Every process in the PMBOK, almost all, I'm not going to say all of them, almost all of them, if you look at them in the very beginning, they say, adaptive or agile considerations for this one process, right? And I can just do a control find and say adaptive. Actually, I should just look for agile, right? And let me see, if I just click a few times, that term is going to show up. This one, right? Considerations for agile adaptive environments. This you will find in just about every one of the processes, this one section of it. That means now for the new exam, if you're waiting for till next year, you have to read this portion and really understand it. Before, it was nice to know, right? So that's one of the differences. The information is still in the PMBOK, but it does require that you focus a little bit differently for the sake of this 50% of the exam, which is coming from the PMBOK. Let me go back to the beginning of this. So it's coming from the PMBOK, specifically from this one portion here. All right. In this one portion, as I mentioned, there's the resource, there's the stakeholder management, conflict management, motivation, power, and so on, team management, team development. All of these contribute to the people side, which is the 42%. Some of the beginning areas, like in developing the project charter, covers some of the business environment. There is a concept of benefits realization, which is part of business environment. And those are usually considerations. You know, when we develop the project charter, some of the needed documents are the business case, and we also have a benefits realization plan. That is mentioned in there, and that is highlighted here, but that's only 8% of your exam. All right, so you could study with this one PMBOK, but to get the other 42%, you got to study this Agile part. So what I've done is I went in, which I'll be doing it just like you. I went in, you know, and when the PMBOK is finished, you think it's all done here, right? You just keep going, and then somewhere around page 700, you know, or close to 800, right? The new piece starts there. Let me just scroll over here. There it is, 756. That ends that one portion of it, and then you see this one portion that says Agile Practice Guide, right? What I have found is if I look at the index of this Agile Practice Guide, the content that is in it, this portion of it, you see things like the Kanban here. You see things like servant leadership. Let me clear the search that I have here. Servant leadership, you know, you wonder what these things are, team composition. You know, let's take a look at this. Why not? Let's take a glance at it. Introduction to Agile. You know, what is Agile? What is the Agile Manifesto? Lean, Kanban, different life cycles, predictive, iterative, incremental, Agile, so on. You know, how to select the right approach that you want to use for your project, how you can mix them up, what are the factors that would influence which choice you go with. And then, well, how do you have an Agile mindset? How do you create an Agile environment to run your project? So they start talking about the Agile mindset, servant leadership, you know, empowering the team, different roles, team composition, and then delivering in an Agile environment. These are all going to be needed for the exam next year. So if you don't want to do these things, take the exam this year, all right? Then they talk about chartering the project and the team, and then common Agile practices, retrospects, which are lessons learned, backlog management or preparation, daily stand-ups, demonstration reviews. Here you got the burn down, burn up charts will probably show up here. Troubleshooting Agile project challenges, and then measurements in Agile projects, Agile team measurement results. So these are all Agile driven. Not really good for someone who's been a civil engineer or mechanical engineer or, you know, electrical or industrial. You probably have not worked in Agile, so take the exam this year. All right. Organizational considerations for project agility, change management, right? Organizational culture, keep those in mind. Procurement and contracts, business practices, multi-team coordination dependencies. And then there's somewhere in here, I can't remember, there's governance in organizational structure. There's something about governance that shows up in there. All right, so this is, I just went through that last portion that was added into the PMBOK, that Agile portion. Now what I want to do is I want to show you what goes into these three domains so you can see the correlation between them, right? As I mentioned, all of the knowledge areas you use to stakeholder procurement, you know, scope, schedule, budget, these are inside the second one in processes, but with a little more focus on, you know, the Agile considerations, the one that I showed you. You have to look at those in every one of the processes. Then for the people side, these are the things that go into it. So the way they look at it is people, which is this 42%, the first domain, has tasks. And these tasks, they have under them, like one task is manage conflict. Under that, there's a few bullets. These are called enablers. If you want to remember this, you can download this PMP exam blueprint from PMI's website. I'll also put the link in the description so it's easier for you. But you see, the domain will have tasks like manage conflict. The task will have enablers, which are the things you need to know to be able to complete this task, which is needed for that specific domain. So domain, then task, then enablers, right? All right, so the tasks here are manage conflict, lead a team, and you look at this, value servant leadership. Do you recall leadership, servant leadership? Well, yeah, it was there. So I'm going to go back, servant leadership. So that you probably would never have caught if you never read that last portion that was added into the PMBOK. So all you have to do is read that Agile portion that was added, the practice guide that was added at the end. It covers a lot of what you see here in the people side. Plus, in the original one, where you dealt with stakeholders and teams and so on. And they talked about leadership styles. We already covered a good deal of that. We covered a good deal of the communication, motivation, conflict management, sources of power, right? These have already been covered. So managing conflicts was already covered in resource management, leading a team. But this leading a team portion, right, with the servant leadership, that you're only going to get when you start reading this Agile practice guide that is at the end of the PIM book. And then supporting team performance, empowering team members and stakeholders, ensuring team members and stakeholders are adequately trained. I'm going to read this for you because you probably haven't and you're not gonna, but the videos are easier to watch, so I'll just do it for you. And then building a team, address and remove impediments or obstacles, negotiate project agreements, collaborate with stakeholders, build shared understanding, engage and support virtual teams, define team ground rules. That's already discussed. If you go back to a lot of these are flavors in my discussions and the 45 videos that I have for the PMP. You'll find them in there. Mentor relevant stakeholders, promote team performance through application of emotional intelligence. I know that word I've mentioned. I know I probably said 1 or 2 sentences about it, but you got to know more about it. So if it's not in this Agile portion, if you don't see it here, you have to go Google it and learn about it. This is if you're waiting for next year to take the exam. If you're going to do it this year, don't bother. My 45 videos are perfectly okay for the exam for this year. All right. So that task 14 here, which ends with promote team performance, completes the 40%, what is it? 42% of your exam, which is the people side, right? And then you go to processes, right? Process, which is 50% of the exam, which is the second domain. And it has several tasks, but if you look at them, except for this first portion of it, execute project with the urgency required to deliver business value. They're talking about business value here. It probably is there when we're talking about the project charter. You will see later on the business part, which is 8% of the exam. They also talk about, project evaluation and so on, or, benefits management. So there is a flavor of this when you read the PIM book in the charter side of things. Okay, you might find it there. And then communication, risk, stakeholders. That 50%, the process is mostly the knowledge areas we're familiar with. Budget and resources, schedule, quality, scope, planning, change management, which is part of integration, procurement, project artifacts. These are knowledge management and organizational process assets, project methodology, methods and practices. These are the same thing as the life cycles, deciding which one to use. And then governance. Governance is covered in the Agile portion if you go read it. Managing project issues, issue management, knowledge transfer, and project closure. So these are in the PIM book, right? And they are just distributed across. We're no longer thinking initiation, planning, execution, module control, and closing. We're not thinking by knowledge areas. We're thinking by task. See, one thing that most people don't realize is that the PMP exam is not based on knowledge areas. It's not based on, it's not based on knowledge areas. And it's not only based on the PIM book. They can actually go outside of the PIM book. The people who write the questions for PMI, they consider other sources outside of the PIM book. They're looking at what it takes for a project manager to be successful in managing a project. So when we look at these tasks, they don't correlate one-for-one with knowledge areas, and they don't correlate with process groups. They correlate, in this case, with a domain that you as a PM needs to be familiar with. You need to know the processes. You need to know the people side. You need to know the business side, right? And processes represent half of what you need to know. Process 17 finishes the process side, process domain. And now we go into the third domain, which is business environment, and that represents 8% of your exam. And it only has a few tasks in it. It has 4 tasks relating to plan and manage project compliance. If I search for the word compliance in the PIM book, it shows up in a lot of places in the original part of the PIM book and also in the Agile portion. In quality, it is there. Evaluate and deliver project benefits and value. It is there when we talk about the charter, when we talk about benefits management. Also, when they talk about, evaluating projects, you have to also look at things like net present value. How do we look at whether a project is going to bring any value to the organization. So things like net present value, return on investment, these are all ways for us to figure out if a project is of value to the organization. Then evaluate and address external business environment changes for impact on scope. These are enterprise environmental factors, things that could affect the project. And then support organizational change. This part of it is covered in the Agile. So bottom line, this is what we need to know about the new exam. It is suitable for people who are familiar with Agile or are willing to spend time to understand Agile. If you are not one of those, take the exam this year, hurry it up, get it done, right? Do it soon enough so you have another chance to repeat it in case you don't pass the first time around. If you are familiar with Agile and you want to wait till next year, that's fine. Read the PMBOK with a focus on those areas that say Agile considerations. Also read the last portion of the PMBOK, which is this portion, which is the Agile Practice Guide, and that should fill in the gaps for you. Don't focus on 5 process groups. I don't think we ever did anyways, but just realize it is now focused on 3 domains, not the 5 process groups, but it's still the same content. It's just redistributed amongst these. Realize that half of the questions will be of an agile nature. And that means if it's going to ask a lot about, Scrum, Sprint, backlog management, iterations, adaptive approaches, and so on. So you have to be familiar with these approaches to pass the exam next year. Realize that the next year exam includes things pertaining to managing stakeholders, the team, conflict management, soft skills, emotional intelligence. Those need to be bigger for you. They are there this year for the exam, but they are there in a bigger way next year, right? But the biggest change is really the Agile perspective. Half of the questions will be on Agile, all right? Other than that, it's still the same PMBOK. You can still read this last section. What I would recommend, read the PMBOK with the focus on the Agile portions, additional focus on it. You still need to know the other part because you're going to have 50% on waterfall and 50% on Agile. Read PMBOK with attention to everything that is in there. Read the last part, the Agile Practice Guide. And then once you're done reading the PMBOK, go to PMI's exam blueprint for the PMP and go to the portion that discusses the tasks that are inside each one of these domains. Scroll through it like this. Look at every task in every domain and read these bullets and ask yourself, do I understand these? If I don't, then I need to go read up on it either in the PMBOK or some other source on Google or YouTube. None of these are really specific to PMI, so you can Google them, you can search for them on YouTube, and you'll be fine. So that's the bottom line. Either do it this year with what we have for resources. My videos should be sufficient. You can fill in any blanks you want, but they typically have been sufficient. And a lot of the viewers have given me feedback that they've been able to take the exam with some practice questions. Another point, with regards to practice questions, all resources that you see these days with, like sample questions and answers are for the current exam. So you don't really have a lot of resources for next year's exam. So if you're going to wait till next year, then don't count on having questions and answers. Instead, count on your ability to match what you've read in the PMBOK with what you see here in the exam blueprint, that you've covered all of these bullets. And that should be sufficient for you to pass the exam. That's all I have for you right now. This was a quick review of the upcoming exam. In case you have not done so, in case you've been thinking about it but haven't really bothered to look at it, I hope this was useful to you and clarified some of the questions that you might have. And if you have any questions, please put them down in the comments below. I do review them on a frequent basis, and I do answer all of them, every single one of them. I'm actively on YouTube. If you're not a subscriber and you like my videos and you want to know about upcoming videos, please hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you know when I have a new video. It's always going to be related to these same topics, projects, programs, risks, and so on. If you really like my videos, I'd appreciate that you just take 1 second to click the like button on all of the videos that you watch for me, and maybe share this with your friends so they can also enjoy these videos. I hope you like this video, and I hope I get to see you on the future videos, and I would love to hear from you. Let's stay in touch. Take care. Bye-bye.